He's easily entertained.
Give me a gavel and I'm happy. I always wanted to be a judge.
Be an auctioneer.
That's another idea. Senate Judiciary is now in session. We're going to hear first 376 FN. The Honorable Senator Guida is going to present the bill to us. Great to see you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Bob Guida, Senate District 2, and prime sponsor of Senate Bill 376 FN. This is a bill with life-saving consequences. I'm a veteran of aviation, and when you have an accident in the airline world, there's always an after-action report that's done in significant detail. It involves the FAA, the National Transportation Safety Board, the pilots union, the mechanics, the airline, the manufacturers. They descend on the site, literally, okay? And they take evidence to an extreme degree. They then deliberate over that evidence for sometimes years, a couple, 3 years, to find out what went wrong and what can we do to improve our training, our policies and procedures, and our operational measures to prevent it from happening again. In the last several years, we have had 3 of our citizens killed by police officers in the line of duty. Those 3 citizens were all known to have mental health issues, and the police were cleared as appropriate by the Attorney General in the subsequent investigation. But that investigation only determines whether or not the officer involved violated the law regarding the use of lethal force. That investigation does nothing to investigate circumstances or potential points of intervention that might have occurred earlier on in the evolving scenario before the tragic necessity of taking a life came down. So what this bill does is establishes a study committee. And I'd like to share with you members that participated in developing this bill, and I will add the subsequent amendment to it that you have received, which we'll talk about shortly. Senator Rosenwald, Commissioner Shibinette, Katya Fox, who's involved with HHS, Attorney General Formella, State Trooper Nathan Noyes, Commissioner Bob Quinn, Frank Harris, who's here today, in charge of our, if you will, Capitol Facility Police, Elizabeth Sargent, representing police officers, sheriffs, and so forth, a number of others. This was quite a very, very high-level look down on a problem that I think is solvable. This committee, if formed, will study after a fatal shooting or another shooting that is deemed deserving of review, the entirety of that incident from the first point of contact until its conclusion, with the specific objective of identifying points in that scenario along the way where an intervention of a different nature might have occurred that would have prevented the ultimate loss of human life. This in no way, and I underscore this, no way understates or diminishes, okay, the circumstances in some cases in which an officer in hundredths of a second has to make a life or death decision. Okay. This bill is not designed in any way to critique an individual. It's designed to look at a succession of events in which an intervention might have taken place by qualified personnel to stop the ultimate tragic outcome. We name numbers of people to this committee we form it as a committee because we want legislators looking as to how to legislate this law if it comes about. We invite participants, and you can read in the original bill, Commissioner of Department of Health and Human Services, Commissioner of Department of Safety, representative from HHS, responsible for establishing policy regarding mental health crisis intervention, appointed by the Commissioner, a representative from the Department of Safety, responsible for statewide overview of SWAT engagements, appointed by the Commissioner, the Director of Police Standards and Training, John Chippa, Chief Executive Officer of the New Hampshire Hospital, or designee, the Executive Director of New Hampshire Brain Injury Association, the Executive Director of the National Alliance for Mental Illness, New Hampshire, President of the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police, or designee, the President of the New Hampshire Police Association, or designee, a member of the New Hampshire Tactical Officers Association appointed by the president. And I would also ask the committee to consider adding another participant, the Department of Corrections, to this list. Again, the purpose of this and is to investigate along the chain of events that happens, okay, a point at which an intervention supported by a change in policy or procedures might have precluded the tragic outcome. Again, reiterating, this is not a look down on the officer individually. This is not intended, nor can the contents in any way, shape, or form, electronic, written, verbal, or otherwise, be utilized in any way, okay, as a vehicle for discipline or any other measures of that sort. That's the first part of the bill. It's something I think we need to study. It's achievable, and it's even more important now that we have our mobile crisis units beginning to deploy. And though we only have 4, I think maybe 5 of those units throughout the state, the importance of the next part of this bill will become apparent. A very small number of the officers that serve and protect our citizens in the state are trained in what's known as crisis intervention. That's training that's given by Lieutenant Frank Harris, who will testify later, to our state police. And he oversees that training and brings in a number of experts. It's a 40-hour course. All right. The second part of this bill appropriates $3.95 million because it's time to stop talking about mental health and the impact it's having on our society, on our citizens, on our families, on our kids, and the ultimate, sometimes tragic outcomes. But because we don't have an unlimited number of mobile crisis units and they're not available instantly to any community, that $3.95 million is a request to train one officer in every police jurisdiction in New Hampshire. That would include sheriffs, that would include corrections, that would include the prisons, okay? One officer in every municipality in this 40-hour critical incident training so that we have resources in the field that when a call goes out that somebody's behaving in a way that's becoming potentially dangerous, a community or a group of communities will have a resource or a number of resources available immediately to respond and perhaps change what would be a normal police response, an unexpected and, in fact, proper police response to an incident, and to instead overlay the mental health crisis intervention training over that so that we can wait, if possible, till the mobile crisis unit gets there and we can avoid an unnecessary loss of life. I've been bothered for a number of years by seeing the Attorney General's report come out that a shooting is justified. He is doing his job, or she is doing her job. All right, our attorney generals are stipulated by law as to what they do. And they look at the criminality or non-criminality of the policeman's actions, and that's all. So justified is very different than necessary. And that's the genesis of this entire piece of legislation, is to say, when something like that happens, when we have a tragic taking of a human life by an officer or a SWAT team, whomever, in the performance of their lawful duties, I can tell you that the officers don't relish that possibility, okay? And I can tell you that the families don't, and I'm certainly sure that the victims don't either. And so we have an opportunity here to put in place training for when the police officer gets called to the scene, the first responder gets there, he or she will have some resource there in mental health that looks at an individual and says, hey, you know, instead of approaching this person, I should back away, all right? Or instead of staying away, maybe I should approach them. Or how I conversationalize with them, the tone of voice, all these things, factors that go into trigger points for precipitating an event that would necessitate the taking of a life. And so with that, I'm happy to conclude my testimony, and I'll certainly be willing to take any questions.
I'm going to go first. Just 2 things. You did very good topical issue. I appreciate the second part a lot, the CTI training. Just a couple quick questions, which I probably should know. So you're saying right now we're not doing anything in a case of if there was a shooting today, officer, and there's a death resulting, there's no standard mental health review going on to see, look back at the guy's past, right?
If such a review is done, it's done departmentally.
Okay.
I don't believe the Attorney General does not look at that. Okay, he looks at the criminality or lack thereof for the actual use of lethal force.
Just a quick follow-up. Thank you, Senator Gata. Are there mental health testings? Are there shrinks? Like, do they go annually and, everyone out on the force just to make sure that they're in a good frame of mind, in a good place? Is there evaluations like that going on periodically?
Well, I'm not sure. This bill doesn't address that, Senator.
Okay.
This bill addresses training police,
Yep.
okay, and establishing committee to review the chain of events that led up to the shooting to see if there's a possible intervention or a training mechanism that could be put in place to train our officers better, okay, to use that mental health training to prevent the ultimate tragic outcome.
Gotcha. Senator Whitley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. And thank you, of course, for your sensitivity for this issue. I know it keeps a lot of us up at night. So I'm wondering what the conversation was like about the bill creates a study committee to look at the issue of creating a incident review board. So why shouldn't we just create the review board if we think it's necessary?
It's an excellent question, Senator. Thank you. I think that due to the number of participants and stakeholders, to throw the bill out there initially, which we had talked about, would be because of the sensitivity, especially, frankly, of our police officers right now who are being held in perhaps not as high esteem as they ought to. They're gun shy. And so before we establish a policy as a state, I think it's very important that we bring all the stakeholders to the table and say, again and again, this is not about finding culpability. This is about looking at the mental health aspects of this. Could we have intervened? To do that, given the current environment regarding our police officers, I think would be premature. Let's everybody at the table, and we can assimilate all of the things that go into this and develop the best possible legislation. Similar program exists for the hospitals, okay? And everything in that program is, in terms of evidentiary, is not. It's prohibited from being used in any way for discipline or evidentiary in a trial or any kind of litigation, because the point at the end of the day is not to find fault. The point at the end of the day is to look to the process that produced an undesirable outcome, okay, and pick out places where we can change our training or, some other mechanism to prevent that tragic outcome in future events.
Thank you. Follow-up? Thank you. That makes sense to me. My other question is related to, you had mentioned the statewide mobile crisis response, and I think you're absolutely right that we haven't had a statewide mobile crisis rapid response, but we now do. So as of, just last month, we should have statewide access for children and adults to mobile crisis. So I'm wondering if you would be amenable to just making that indication somewhere in there. I mean, perhaps it is in the appropriation section about the CIT training. I mean, there's an obvious link between that training and making those linkages with the community, or perhaps in the mission of the study committee you're establishing. So specifically calling out the existing and newly developing nascent rapid response from the state.
It's an excellent question. It was, in fact, a topic of discussion during the deliberations that this group had over several meetings. And in fact, there is already, if not already developed, there's in development a memorandum of agreement or understanding between Department of Safety and HHS. Because you're dealing here with situations that can range from something that's a mild irritation to a deadly force incident. And so I would be reluctant to make that change at this time. I'd leave it to the departments maybe to come forward with a request to do that. Because again, we only have, I think, 4, maybe 5 mobile crisis units funded. I think, again, the important part here is getting the rubber to meet the road, get the officers trained, and get the process in place to evaluate these incidents. I think that what you're asking is de facto happening anyway. And so, again, this based on the testimony of the commissioners during the meetings that we had, that they are in fact working at a very high level, MOU level, to integrate. How does a mobile crisis unit respond when they get there and there's already an officer with a weapon drawn? These types of things. And police only have, a tenth of a second to respond in many cases. I went through some of the training that our SWAT teams go through. And I will tell you, as a former Marine and as a former FBI agent, I would not want to be in their position. But I think to bring your point forward, I think it's already being addressed. I think future legislation based upon what the departments between themselves, given all the many dynamics that can enter into this, I think would be more appropriate.
Thank you. And I just did want to clarify that we now have funded statewide access to mobile crisis. You're right that we used to have only 4 teams, but now we are up and running. But it's an emerging process, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from Department of Safety and DHHS about that memorandum. So thank you.
Go ahead, Senator Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, good to see you. Your explanation of the bill, I think, helped clarify for me your intent. And if I look at line 16 on page 1, where the committee is established, the purpose of performing a comprehensive analysis of all mental health aspects of incidents involving law enforcement use of deadly force. I didn't get from that the distinction that you made in your testimony about policy and procedures and training versus the judgment of individual actions. And I think so that those lines are clearly defined for the committee, because I could see them moving around on that. That added to the committee's purpose, I think would be a valuable clarification. The question is, would you agree?
I'm actually, could you restate what you're trying to say? Because I didn't get the gist of it. I'm sorry.
So this, what it says here is that the purpose is a comprehensive analysis of all mental health aspects of incidents. I didn't take from that statement what you put into your testimony, where you provided a distinction between this committee is going to consider the policies, procedures, and training for mental health aspects of use of weapons lethally or not. I still thought that there was going to be some judgmental aspect in this purpose of individual actions, which you said clearly is not a purpose.
Right, and I would say it's an excellent point, Senator. If you look under Roman 1, starting on, on line 4, the General Court seeks to study establishing a committee or commission to review all incidents involving use of deadly force. Such committee to focus exclusively on comprehensive review of mental health aspects of all deadly force incidents, and then with all working papers, notes, deliberations, electronic records and correspondence, discussions, and information or work products developed by such committee to be absolutely exempt from discovery or disclosure for any reason and prohibited from disclosure or use for discipline, prosecution, or civil litigation. So I think that clearly establishes the fact that anything that comes out of this committee's, should it be formed, not the study committee, but the ultimate committee or commission, is A, not for any kind of litigious or punitive purposes, and B, is to be used by police standards and training to perhaps, well, not to perhaps, to improve based on what they find in terms of facts from the incidents. Are you suggesting that we put a statement to that effect in here?
In section 2, I am.
I wouldn't have a problem, and I'd certainly welcome the testimony of the stakeholders, if you will, as they come forward to perhaps address that issue as well.
And part of why I do is that the findings disappear once this gets into statute, so that the committee purpose really is what stands as law. And that's why I think the clarification of what is included and what is not would be valuable in section 2.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Khan. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. How many, do you happen to know, Senator, how many officers are trained in CIT at this time?
I do not, but it is a significant minority of the state. It is a significant minority of the state's law enforcement officers. I think there probably is subsequent testimony that will give some numbers to that.
Do you know how many officers, since this is going to pay for one officer from each department, and some departments already have officers trained in CIT, do you know how many officers you didn't?
Subsequent testimony will attest to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there had been some discussion about, well, some departments, largely your larger departments, right, already have some officers trained because they can afford the 40 hours and the cost of that locally.
Right.
So whether those are incorporated as also, this is to get that initial cadre out there. So we may look at paring it back by perhaps eliminating, reducing those departments from consideration. But those are things for the committee to discuss, and I think, again, subsequent testimony might help deliberate, give some light to that.
Just a quick question, Senator. In New Hampshire, what's our use of deadly force proportionate to other states? I'm guessing we're in the low end. I know we're low population, but proportionally, are we one of the lowest incidents of deadly force?
I don't know, but I would guess as well. First of all, our people are much more supportive of our police than places like California, New York, Washington, D.C. Our crime rate is the lowest in the country, you're certainly amongst them. And so for those reasons, if you have very low crime rate, you have very low response and very obviously less opportunity for the escalation of those incidents to lethal force.
Thank you. I guess we're all set. Thank you, Senator Gatta.
Can I ask one more?
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Khan, go ahead.
Senator, the appropriation part of in section 7, so it's going to draw on funds in this fiscal year. Your intent is that these dollars would be available in a continuing appropriation. I mean, that these are non-lapsing dollars through a long, long time, I assume?
The purpose of this program is to get everybody trained in 2 years. One officer in every jurisdiction in the state in 2 years. Which leads to the next consideration, which is Amendment 418S.
Yeah.
All right? And what that amendment does, it changes who's going to manage the program. That's the major change to it. Changes who's going to manage that program from NAMI, National Association of Mental Illness, to the current people that are in charge of the program at present, and that's the Police Standards and Training Council. Okay, so that just makes this bill consistent with what already exists. Some of our officers have gone through this training, but generally those are officers from larger municipalities with bigger budgets who can afford an officer away for a week to go through that training. So there's that. We had President of the Sheriff's Association, Civil Liberties Union, New Hampshire Troopers Association, New Hampshire Police Association. That may already be in there. It is already in there, yeah. And at the request of the Department of Corrections Commissioner, she asked if we would incorporate her as well, her department as well. So that's the change.
So it just as a matter of time on this, it'd be your intent to see that these dollars for the crisis intervention training would be available from July 1 of 22 to June 30 of 24.
Right. And to be honest, I wouldn't care what the end date was in the sense of if for some reason the training rate couldn't be accomplished, non-lapsing into the following, just so we get the training done. That's the point that we're trying to make. We want to get it started. I'd make the funds, I think, non-lapsing, and rather than put a definitive end on it, I would just say until one officer in each jurisdiction is trained, and that depends on, again, the training rate, the resources. They bring a lot of resources in. They contract with people that come in for this training, some. So if they can't get here and the class has to cancel, or, so there are variables in there. But certainly, I strongly favor establishing it, upon passage, or July 1 of 22, and going forward until completion, something to that effect.
Yep. Okay. I get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Khan. You're all set?
Yeah, good.
Thank you, Senator Gatta, for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Okay, next we call Cheryl Bailey.
Cheryl Bailey.
Go for it.
Thank you all, Judiciary Committee, for being here on this matter today. My name is Cheryl Bailey. I've had to call the police many times over the past 10 years.
You want to sit?
Want me to sit? Okay. Okay. Do you want me to take my mask off? No, that's okay. Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Cheryl Bailey. I've had to call the police many times over the past 10 years for my son's mental health crisis. They were always there to help us. And of course, when there's one crisis, it's not just one responder responding. It's many responders responding, taking a lot of the responders out of their work area to assist in a crisis situation. I have been part of the wonderful CIT training with NAMI for the past couple of years. That has been very successful, talking to the police officers throughout our state about mental health and really how to approach, someone that is in crisis like my son. It's taken very well. They had many questions. The support was just phenomenal, and I highly, highly support this bill. So expanding the CI training is crucial for our police force to keep everyone safe. Establishing a committee to make recommendations regarding creativity of a new board to review mental health incidents to reduce the use of deadly force is crucial. Not everybody knows how to handle a mental health crisis, and without the appropriate training, things can go bad very fast. I support SB 376, and it should be passed, and I thank you for your consideration. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Does anyone? No, thank you for your
Okay.
testimony today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Patrick Dowing. Afternoon, Patrick. How you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Could not be better. Thank you.
Awesome.
Just state your name again and
All right, Patrick
Go for it.
Dowling, and I'm here because I am in full support of Bill 376. I have been working with Lieutenant Harris as a guest speaker with my mom for the past 3 years, and having a unique perspective of someone who has gone through mental health admissions, both voluntary and involuntary, is really helpful for police officers. They get to kind of get a perspective of, okay, this person isn't the authority figure, he's the patient. So he has this idea as to how things should be handled, and I've never had a violent experience really, except when I was in the hospital, the emergency room. I punched an officer because I did not want to be restrained or put on a bed, and it's very crucial that it's really unique for a mental health crisis because we're experiencing altered states of consciousness, we're experiencing mania, psychosis, and we're really trying to grasp what is going on in front of us while there's completely other obstacles that we're facing outside of that. We can be hearing voices, we could be seeing things, we could be feeling like we have superhuman strength. So it's really, you gotta be really careful with what you say, do, and your whole body movement is important. So it's very psychological how you have to approach a mental health patient, whereas say someone else was just drunk and was disorderly, you can handle that a little bit easier because that person is going to be more responsive, I guess you could say. And it's harder for someone who, especially with dual diagnosis, has two different symptoms going on plus the substance, which is very common for like 50% of mental health patients. So I think it's really important to have someone who understands what mania and psychosis is and actually be there and kind of talk them through, because what they're experiencing isn't fake, it's real. It's exactly what they're experiencing and it's their reality. So it's very important to understand that they are, I guess you could say, like, accepted to experience those kinds of ways, and to have someone talk through it with them and really find some sort of grounding in this chaos, because a police officer doesn't understand that. Neither does a parent or anyone other than someone who's gone through similar experience. So I think it's really crucial to have a mental health person, someone with a mental illness involved in these situations, because they can really help de-escalate the situation. And I'm kind of jabbering, but
I jabber all the time. So. Does anyone have any questions? We thank you for your insight and your bravery, testimony, and confronting it, and it's very helpful to everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you, Patrick, because coming here to testify is incredibly important, but your participation in that training and your perspective is so unique, and we're grateful for your service for doing
yeah,
that.
I wish I could word it better, but I'm a little
Did great.
nerve-wracking.
Thank you.
Yep.
Lisa Mascio. If I said it right? Welcome, Lisa.
It's actually Lissa.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Lisa, yeah.
It happens all the time. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my testimony. My name is Lissa Mascio. I am the legislative liaison for the Department of Corrections. I am here on behalf of Commissioner Hanks, who sends her regrets she is not available to appear before you. However, she has been in communication with Senator Geider, as he indicated. The department is in strong support of this bill with the slight amendment, which I believe Senator Geider added orally to his amendment today, to include the Department of Corrections. The commissioner has provided some testimony with regards to the work that the department is already doing and how this arena impacts the Department of Corrections, including a current memorandum of understanding between the department and DHHS for NAMI to be doing this CIT training already, along with some feedback from one of our probation and parole officers who underwent the training this past summer, of just how useful and critical this training is. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Senator French.
Thank you, Senator. So we train officers in CIT now?
I saw that NAMI is here, and they could speak more to what that training entails. But yes, this past year, about a year ago, the Department of Corrections did enter into a short-term memorandum of understanding to do some of this training with our probation and parole officers. I'm not sure if this which is being proposed is the exact same. I would defer to NAMI on that.
Someone else might know.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Massey, for your
Thank you
testimony.
very much.
Ken Norton. And Holly Stevens, I guess. Okay, sounds good. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator.
Just state your names for the record and go to it.
Ken Norton from NAMI, New Hampshire.
Holly Stevens, Director of Public Policy, NAMI, New Hampshire.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. NAMI, New Hampshire is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with a mission to improve the lives of all people impacted by mental illness and suicide. I have 35 years of off and on training of law enforcement that I've done during my career. And I was also a member of the Governor's Law Enforcement Accountability Community and Transparency Commission. But I'm also here as a family member who has had to call 911 during a mental health crisis in my home when things were unsafe. And as Senator Gada testified, there have been ongoing meetings that NAMI New Hampshire has been having for several years now relative to the use of deadly force and officer-involved shootings. And I really thank Senator Gada and all the sponsors on this bill for what has come forward from those meetings in terms of a consensus and collaborative effort. Our interest in this is to decrease the number of people with mental illness who are involved in officer-involved shootings, and to inform training efforts that are undergoing right now. NAMI New Hampshire provides a 16-hour mental health block as part of all training for law enforcement officers coming through the police academy. And we also are providing some CIT training, and I'll speak a little bit more about that and answer Senator French's question in a second. But we're also very concerned about the mental health impacts on families of people that are the family members of victims of officer-involved shootings, as well as the mental health impacts on the officers themselves and their families. Recently, in December of this year, the Concord Monitor ran a 3-part series called Shots Fired, and I have a link to that in our written testimony. I really encourage you all to read it. It was a very well done piece, and it highlights one particular case that identifies some of the system failures that result in law enforcement having to respond to these types of crises, but also talks about the impact on the family to lose a loved one in an officer-involved shooting, and in a very human sense talks about the impact on that officer who is not returned to the line of duty because of the trauma that he has experienced as a result of that shooting. And part of that article details that they went through 10 years worth of reports and officer-involved shootings in the state and determined that 60% of them in New Hampshire involve people with known mental illness. NAMI New Hampshire is currently doing crisis intervention team training. CIT training is internationally recognized. The President's 21st Century Task Force on Policing had, in some of the recommendations that they made when the report came out in 2015, they recommended that all police officers receive CIT training. And as Senator Gida explained, part of what this bill would do is the challenge that we've been facing now with CIT training is that the smaller departments can't really afford to send people, that they would have to cover overtime and or salary costs in order to cover that person being gone for 40 hours. So it's a 40-hour training. And I would also say that one of the challenges from a provider's point of view with NAMI New Hampshire is that it's a very intensive training. We have over 20 faculty members who participate, as well as volunteers like Cheryl Bailey. And there's a lot of role play that takes place. And so the classes need to be small, about 25 or 30 people. And subsequently, we're training about 150 people a year right now. And Senator French, to answer your question, I believe that the number that we looked at for this proposal was to bump that up to 300 people a year.
300.
And again, the challenge being because it is so intensive and because many of the faculty are volunteers, and the volunteers that we use, we can only do so many trainings without, sort of overburdening those volunteers and the faculty. So I would just like to address a little bit about the study committee to say, I think that Senator Gada, really characterized it very well. But to note that we have several other fatality review committees existing in the state legislatively. There's one for domestic violence, there's one for child mortality deaths, there's one for suicide deaths, there's one for incapacitated and older adults. There may be others as well. And I think that Senator Khan, I think you asked a great question, and I would support the change in language that you made, but the focus of this is not to duplicate the effort that the Attorney General's office is already doing relative to the finding about whether it was legally justified or not. But there's a huge gap between what the existing report that the Attorney General's office does and that finding of criminal of criminal intent or whether it was legally justified. So the Attorney General's office now uses a standard boilerplate language in their reports, and I quote, it says, "The Attorney General does not investigate or opine on the particular procedures or tactics used by law enforcement officers. Instead, the Attorney General's review of officer-involved use of deadly force incidents consists of a criminal investigation which is limited to determining whether officers complied with applicable law." So as Senator Gaida testified, any review that's done beyond that is done to an internal department. There really is nothing that would inform findings for the purposes of training or other recommendations that might come about it. I have particularly noted in our testimony the Claremont shooting, which was one of the more recent reviews that was done. It was 144 pages. And I would just say that in the call I received from Senator Gaida the morning after that report came out, his question to me immediately was, why didn't the local police department take this person into custody when they responded 4 hours before the incident that resulted in the SWAT team being called out? The person was admittedly hallucinating, having suicidal thoughts. And the report mentions that they cleared the scene, mentions that they considered doing an involuntary emergency admission, but never says anything further about what happened in those intervening 4 hours or why. Lots of other questions that could be raised about what alternatives there would have been to use of deadly force. And again, our NAMI New Hampshire's intent is not to place shame or blame here. Our intent is to reduce these incidents, to learn from these incidents, and to figure out how we can prevent them in the future. And we also want to really pay attention to the mental health of those families and the mental health of first responders and law enforcement officers and their families. These incidents have a profound impact on people. So I would ask you to, on behalf of NAMI New Hampshire, to support Senate Bill 376 as amended, and would also support the language that was proposed by Senator Khan. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that people have.
Did you wish to add anything, Ms. Stevens?
Excuse me?
Did you want to add anything?
I do not. I am just here as a,
Great. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Senator.
Support.
Thank you.
I-
Thank you.
First, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I should add, this is my last week at NAMI New Hampshire. so-
That's what I was going to say. Thank you for being here, and congratulations on your impending retirement. We're going to miss you around the State House, but we are in good hands, so thank you.
And I have promised Senator Gaida I will follow this bill because it's something we've been working on for a while.
So my question to you both is similar to what I asked to Senator Gaida. What I hear from you and what I heard from other folks is that we know that this is necessary. We have a child fatality board and other similar review boards. Why don't we just create the board? Why do we have to further study it?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. It's a great question. And as Senator Gaida said, we talked about it in these meetings. And I think that it was just very difficult to get into the particulars of who would be on it, what it would look at, all of that. And I think that the consensus was it would be better to come forward with a study committee and to gather more information and then to make a determination, some of those determinations, to build consensus around some of those pieces and then go that route.
Senator French?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying today. In the past, I've had incidences within my family where I've had to intercede and call the police for mental health crisis for a family member. I did it once, and it was handled well. The future ones from that time, when the first time I did it, I didn't know what else to do, and luckily it was handled well. But while it was being handled, I was afraid my relative would lose their life if he didn't do the right thing. So after that, whenever the incidents came up, I handled it myself and took him in and had him committed myself. My question is 40 hours enough training to train an officer to handle these properly?
Thank you for your question, Senator, and thank you for your, for your personal example as well, because it is very important, and having been in that situation as a family member and that uncertainty about what that response will look like is really important. I think that it's a tough question to answer. I mean, certainly the 40 hours would be in addition to the 16 hours that, the block of training that people get when they come through the academy. And according to, the International Association of CIT, that training should be followed up with a refresher course. I believe it's every 3 years. That would be 8 hours of training to increase their certification. Larger communities have CIT teams where, officers are specifically assigned to deal with these mental health crises. But I think that, as Senator Guida testified, the intent here was to try to get at least one officer in every community trained in CIT. So it's certainly a significant step forward. I think I would also defer that question to Director Skippa from Police Standards, who I'm assuming is going to testify after me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed the timing on this, and maybe you've got some insight into this. If the first meeting's convened in August and the final report's due in November or by November, maybe we got a couple meetings in there. Anyway, do you think that's sufficient time during an election season and all that stuff?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think that the timing was intended to make a recommendation so that legislation could be submitted next year. And I think the fact that it's a study committee maybe allows for more efficient use of that time. I guess I'm not really going to opine about whether that's sufficient time during an election year or not. But that was the reasoning behind it.
Good, thank you.
Thank you both for your testimony. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Chief Goldstein, come on down. I usually see you at Dunkin' Donuts. Now you're back here again. They do. I run into them. Don't we run into each other at Dunkin' Donuts a lot?
Oh, yes.
We used to.
Yes,
For the coffee. It was just for the coffee, though.
exactly. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Goldstein, and I'm the police chief in the city of Franklin. And before I go any further, I want to apologize. I had a dental procedure this morning, and the Novocaine has not worn off yet, so I'm working through that as well. I've been a police officer for more than 42 years. And for 23 of those years, I was with the New Hampshire State Police. And for more than half my time at the State Police, I was assigned to the New Hampshire SWAT unit. And my primary role there, while I was trained as an operator, was also as the senior negotiator, crisis and hostage negotiator. So I've dealt with these cases in real-world situations. I don't keep numbers other than the fact that of all the individuals I talked to who wanted to take their own lives, I lost 3. One was an older gentleman, one was a young teenage boy, and the other was an individual in his late 20s. No matter how hard we tried, we couldn't help them. I'm the chair of the Legislative Committee for the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police, and I've held that position for 13 years. Today I'm testifying in relation to SB 376, and we merely want to voice some of our concerns about this. We certainly appreciate the underpinnings of this bill, and we support and the underlying premises as well. But there's a great deal of work to be done here, a great deal of work. This is an incredibly complex topic. As long as this remains a study, as long as this bill remains a study, we believe that we can contribute to that. Now, I'm usually embarrassed to do this, but I think I have to. By way of further introduction, I've been involved in the nexus of mental health and law enforcement issues since the mid-1970s. I hold a BA in psychology, and I know the committee's heard this before, an MS in public health, with a concentration in mental health issues and a PhD in counseling and human services. I have conducted empirical research in this area and have published articles both in peer-reviewed journals as well as trade magazines. I'm a fellow and diplomate of the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, and I'm board certified in both forensic traumatology and as an expert in traumatic stress issues by that organization. I've held a number of adjunct professorships in mental health subjects at such universities as Boston University, both on the undergrad and grad level, New England College, the college then what was called the College for Lifelong Learning, and NHTI. I've conducted grand rounds in these for the emergency psychiatric staff at what is now Tufts Medical, these issues. I also teach at the New Hampshire Police Academy. I'm probably, if not the most senior instructor there in the area of mental health and stress, et cetera. I've got to be number 2. I've been teaching there since 1981. I also have a teaching position in Massachusetts at the municipal academies there. It's important to note that we've met with Senator Guider once relative to this issue. And we did reach some consensus, but we certainly would have appreciated further meetings with him and with other concerned individuals. We are very concerned with the bill, assuming that there's no preconceived outcome at this point. We don't want a preconceived notion. We agree that the assertion in paragraph 1 of the findings section that mental health disorders are increasing, or appear to at least be increasing, and that law enforcement must function successfully within new parameters. We understand that, and we're trying to do our best with that. I want to assure this committee, as well as anybody else listening, that police officers do not wake up in the morning hoping to shoot somebody, hoping to kill somebody. I will tell you that in my experience as a field training officer with the state police, I did have one recruit, one trainee who had that desire. I was able to wash him out completely. However, he went to another state, another jurisdiction, and he followed through with his desire. So I can't say unequivocally that this doesn't happen, but certainly other than that one experience in my years as a police officer, that's the only one I've ever heard of. This shouldn't negate tried and true foundations, such as cornerstones of officer safety and the like. That is very important. This bill can't do that. Police officers are putting everything they have on the line every minute of every day to protect us. I may be a police officer, but I have a family that is not. So I trust in the police officers in my town, my city, at my state to protect my loved ones, but to make sure that they go home at the end of the day as well. That is incredibly important to us. That's the one promise that we make to our families every single day. I will come home. Sometimes that doesn't happen. In 42 years, I've been involved in both the delivery and the receipt of gunfire. Very early in my career, I was involved in an officer-involved shooting. I'm not going to go into the specifics because even this late in my career, I still find it incredibly traumatic. But I will tell you that from the time I signed off out of my cruiser until the time I could get to my portable and ask for help because of what was called a 1066 officer or shots fired was less than a minute. Now we can talk all you want about mobile crisis response. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think the new 988 initiative is a wonderful idea. But I'm here to tell you that these things develop very, very quickly. So quickly, in fact, we lose officers to the tune of 1 every 52 hours in this country. We do not oppose the establishment of a well-heeled body of individuals to study and compile legitimate findings and recommendations as to how to identify and improve the relationship between law enforcement and mental health issues. But, for example, as was already testified to, this bill specifically promises confidentiality of virtually all aspects of the review of incidents involving the use of deadly force and attendant mental health issues. Well, our concern here is later on, after this body has moved on, after I've retired, after some in this room have retired, what happens with the next legislative body that comes up and says, no, we're going to change that? What happens with the next jurist that decides, no, I'm going to grant that 91A request? Quite frankly, we have adopted the attitude of trust but verify. We have to know that we're protected. As for crisis intervention training, I'm involved with that, have been for a number of years with NAMI, and I love it. It's incredible training. And the answer to your question, 40 hours, not even close. Not even close. I have 4 hours to talk about de-escalation techniques, psychopathology, how to deal with people who are undergoing psychopathological or mental health issues, et cetera, 4 hours. And that includes breaks. So it's less than 4 hours. No, we need more. But I know we have to work with what we have. We have to ask ourselves, how many CIT trained officers are needed per department? The bill calls for 1. That's not going to work. I have 1. She's now on maternity leave for 3 months. What do I do with that? I need more. But as was already at full authorized strength. It's still a 1985 roster, but I'm at authorized strength, finally. Legislation may be passed, but actual departmental and individual buy-in has to be part and parcel of this. We have to work with these individuals. There are still officers and police chiefs out there that don't believe in this stuff. I talk to them, try to convince them. We're looking at this as if it's going to be a panacea and everybody's going to buy in, and that's not true. How are the CIT educated members deployed? What shift do they work? Do they work together? In my neighborhood, we would have to be regional. I don't have the luxury that a larger department, a Nashua or a Manchester or a Derry or a Concord has. I don't have that luxury where I can establish a team. Are MOUs required, et cetera? I'm not going to get into the considerations relative to funding because Director Skipper is going to do that, and I think he obviously has his finger on that pulse very well. Who's in charge of the CIT officers? What if lethal force is used? How does that fall in conjunction with the Attorney General's investigation? The concept of mental health is an ever-evolving subject. Who makes the determination as to whether an individual really is mentally ill or not? Now, as this committee may recall, a few days ago, I brought the DSM in to show you how the evolution in psychiatric and psychological diagnosis has evolved over the years. The DSM-2 was this thick, the DSM-5 was this thick. This is what we do. What role does HIPAA play relative to these investigations and reviews of investigative files, health records, et cetera? The chiefs are more than willing to participate in such a committee, keeping in mind that this is at the same time both a simple as well as complex issue. Further, we would make some very specific suggestions. For example, and I'm glad to see, and I sincerely appreciate Senator Guida's changing the title of the bill as well as including the Sheriff's Department. But I'd refer you to number 4, paragraph section D. That doesn't exist. There is, to my knowledge anyway, and my SWAT team certainly doesn't come under this, there is no oversight of SWAT operations here through the Department of Safety. Perhaps the commissioner can tell us otherwise, but I've just established the SWAT unit and nobody's come to me and said, we need to oversee how you do your stuff. We do belong to the association of units, et cetera, that does come up with policies and procedures. But I would suggest, again, we have to be very careful of unintended consequences if you vote and if this bill becomes law. In the same section, all the foregoing issues and those not identified do potentially represent unintended consequences. And I'm just going to share one other thing with you that I saw yesterday in some of the magazines that I get online. A mother, and this is Seattle, Washington, a mother begged police to help with her son, but a new state law meant officers couldn't take her son to get help against his will, even though a judge ordered it. So we have to be very, very careful, and I know that everybody in this committee is aware of that. We have to be very careful of unintended consequences of any bill that comes before these bodies. Thank you.
Chief. Does anyone have any questions? Senator French.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
So do I take it you would be not in favor of this bill the way it's written now?
I think that we have to be very cautious and make the changes before the bill is voted on, yes.
Okay. Follow-up. Will you be working with Senator Guida on those changes?
I would be delighted.
Great, thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Frank Harris. Welcome, Mr. Harris. I'll have you state your name first.
Absolutely, Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Frank Harris, last of H-A-R-R-I-S for the record. And I'm in here position to support SB 376. I'm currently lieutenant and unit commander with the New Hampshire State Police State Office Complex Police Force. Our unit's responsibility is to provide law enforcement service to the Hugh Gallant State Office Complex, right here in Concord, which includes the state hospital, of course. I've served in this capacity at New Hampshire Hospital for roughly 22 years, going on 22 years, and I was at Plymouth
Can you
State.
speak up a hair? I just know a bunch of people. And in the mic. yeah,
Okay,
that'll do
is
it.
that better?
Yes, thank you
I
very much.
apologize. As you can imagine, I've personally been involved in hundreds, if not thousands, of incidents involving de-escalation of people in crisis that have a mental illness over my career. I am intimately aware of the dire need for training for law enforcement in order to be confident and competent in managing incidents that involve people in crisis. I myself have presented trainings for law enforcement, first responders, clinicians on de-escalation for those in mental health crisis for several years now. I found that the majority of law enforcement do not feel completely confident when it comes to managing mentally ill people and negotiating through mental health laws and protocols. This lack of confidence could and likely will have an adverse effects on an officer's response. That comes from a lot of the trainings I have done, a lot of discussions I've had, and this is to general. There is training out there, but when that training is used once a year, people, of course, it gets rusty and they just don't feel as confident with it. I heard the Senator, you ask if 40 hours is enough, and I would concur with Chief Goldstein, absolutely not. I do 40 hours a week, 2,080 hours a year, and that's still, I've been doing it for 22 years, and that's still not enough. I'm learning every day. But 40 hours is a great start. It's more than most PDs are getting now. They get the 16 hours in training at the academy, which is excellent. There's some in-service training, which is excellent. But if you don't use it, you lose it. And I think the CIT will certainly cover that gap. Through several discussions with law enforcement officers, it's abundantly clear that obstacles for obtaining this important training, such as crisis intervention training, a nationally recognized model, include the lack of resources, specifically staffing and budgetary constraints. This is especially true for smaller towns that make up many of our community police departments. The passage of SB 376 will address these issues, allowing police departments statewide to finally participate in this critical training. With respect to establishing a review board for confidentiality analyzing law enforcement engagements with subject to mental illness for utilizing use of force, I support this initiative. It is so very important that we understand all individual aspects of the incident, not just the police presence, or police response. A comprehensive review of incidents and potential behaviors, more on the subject, leading up to and resulting in police use of force on mentally ill people may allow all of those involved, to include all first responders, clinicians, possible family members, to identify areas that may be modified for a safer and non-injurious outcome for future events. Through continued reviews, conversations with stakeholders based on real events, we hope that we will evolve our responses in a positive direction, our responses to these very difficult and potentially life-changing interactions. In closing, I'd like to again go on record for the support of 376. I have heard some testimony about some language, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think there's some room from what I'm hearing and seeing, but I think the concept is there. I think the intent is there, and I think hopefully it gets worked out, because this is something that the state absolutely needs. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time. I am absolutely available for questions.
Thank you, Officer Skipper. No questions, I guess. Thanks very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Chairman.
Geez, can't get away with anything with Con on duty. It's tough.
No, Con is a stickler for.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon,
John, good to see you.
For the record, my name is John Skippa. I'm the Director of New Hampshire Police Standards and Training. The mission of New Hampshire Police Standards and Training is to shape, sustain, strengthen the competency and professionalism of New Hampshire law enforcement in service to our state. We accomplish that goal through setting and enforcing rules for hiring and police conduct, and we also establish full-time, part-time, and in-service training and deliver that training to law enforcement across the state. I am here to speak in support of this bill, and I think that many of my colleagues have covered the same ground that I was planning to cover, and so I'll leave their words to take care of that. and I really just want to speak to kind of a pragmatic piece to this bill. It is important for everyone here to recognize that police standards and training has probably reached its capacity operationally, given the vast number of increases with regard to training and oversight that we have taken on in the last 18 months. And that is just the cumulative, I guess, the cumulative buildup of all of the LEAC recommendations. It's been a little piece extra here and there. There's just been a lot of extra responsibilities. And so to that end, I would ask from a pragmatic point of view that this legislation speak directly under appropriations to allow police standards and training to hire a full-time program specialist who would be able to manage this program. It's going to be a very heavy lift just to keep track of overtime costs, backfill costs. The second piece that I would like to see written within this bill, amended in this bill, again, under appropriations, is that the appropriations, actually, if you read it, it doesn't speak to the actual costs of the training. It speaks to a lot of ancillary costs, to include the backfill, the overtime, meals, travel, all of those things, but it doesn't actually speak to covering the actual cost of the training. We have a wonderful partnership with New Hampshire NAMI, but clearly they are a vendor that we hire to deliver this CIT training. And so to that end, that money will also need to cover the costs of that because this would be above and beyond what we're already doing. But other than that, I have no other information. I stand ready for any questions.
Go ahead, Senator Willie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief, for being here and for all your work. I know it's been a really busy 2 years for you, and I thank you for your service. Your suggestion about adding to the appropriation, would it be, and you had mentioned hiring a full-time program specialist, are you also saying maybe an increase in the budget for the actual training?
So, Senator, just so that I understand, are you asking me if I think the appropriation should be higher than what's?
Correct.
And I don't believe so. I think that this requested appropriation would be able to cover the cost of that full-time person.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for testifying. I was curious about the costs. So we've heard there's 300 officers that will be taking part, and it's a 40-hour class. Why is it $13,000 per week for these officers to get trained?
I can't tell you specifically how that number came to be. I can tell you that, and it's important to recognize that this process would need to be an ongoing process, right? Because if you did the math, there's about 4,200 police officers in the state of New Hampshire, and if we're trying to train one or two from each agency, it'll take a couple of years to get that accomplished. There's a huge demand for CIT training, and we are running classes as fast as we can, as fast as New Hampshire NAMI can get a teaching staff together. We are delivering these classes, and presently New Hampshire NAMI has that contract to do that. But to your question, sir, I cannot speak directly to it, and I'd ask you to maybe check with Senator Gaida, who ultimately came up with that number.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Chief, or Director now, I guess. So I guess you've clarified that each department will have a trainer trained by you. Is that the objective?
The objective would be to train 1 or 2 police officers from every agency with the 40-hour CIT training. We would not be creating what we call triple T or 3T situations. We're not going to train a trainer to deliver that program, only because of the level of expertise that would be needed to deliver that CIT training is, above what we would be able to prepare those officers to do. We have, clinicians and people with significant subject matter experience delivering the program. So it would just be an end user program.
And just for clarification's sake, of 40 hours, are you anticipating like 1 week of training and you'll just cycle through whatever number of courses this entails?
Yeah, you're exactly correct, Senator Khan. The program is a 40-hour program delivered in 1 week, generally. It's a pretty big hit for a smaller agency to send somebody because that officer is literally gone for that entire week. So that backfill and overtime reimbursement would be, very important to some of those smaller agencies. But right now we're delivering it in 1 40-hour block. And I think that it's important to maintain that 40-hour block without breaking it up, just with regard to delivery of the program.
It's helpful. Thanks for helping me envision what the audience is and the length of the program and how it'd be delivered. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Anyone else? Anyone want to testify who hasn't had an opportunity? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm gaveling.
Might be important.
Oh, great. No. I will be brief, and maybe I can just clean up one little item. But first, Robert Quinn, Commissioner of the Department of Safety. I'm here to support this bill. I think it is extremely important. I've heard a lot that's been discussed about, the systems that we're rolling out, the mobile crisis units, and with all of the changes. I just wanted you to know that there are, discussions being held at a high level as to how to roll those out. I think what we've heard is, there has to be an integrated team. Everybody needs to be on the same page as we move forward with these, but I really don't think there's anything more important for the officers and for those that are suffering from mental illness when those intersections take place. And I think this is a step in the right direction, looking at these systems. I agree with what Chief Goldstein said. I think we have to have an approach that we really look at this from all levels as to what took place before, during, and after. I think it's the right thing to do. Just to clarify, though, Chief Goldstein was correct when he said one representative from the Department of Safety responsible for statewide oversight and review of SWAT engagements. We are responsible for our own SWAT team. And at the bottom, there's a member of the New Hampshire Tactical Officers Association that would represent, the local SWAT agencies. But I am here to support the bill and happy to answer any questions. And the CIT training, I will say, does work. I will defer to the chief as to how many hours are sufficient, but roughly, I believe we have 4,000 police officers. There's 100 state troopers that have been trained. I believe 100 local officers and some fire and EMS, but I think it's a giant step in the right direction.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Quinn. That ends that hearing.
Did you close the hearing?
No, just that particular one.
That's what I meant.
Yes, that one.
I did hear you.
I did.
You said
it,
I
because
closed.
Mike picked it up. I closed the hearing.
Yeah.
The hearing's closed. Judiciary is back in session. Senator Waters is present to testify on his bill SB 298. Welcome, Senator Waters. Great to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Senator David Waters from District 4.
Hold on a second, I'm sorry. Can you guys take it outside? Waters. We're just clearing the room here.
I do want to hear everything you have to say, sir.
Can I quote you on that? And still,
Here.
and still for the record, I'm Senator David Waters from District 4, and I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 298, which repeals the law relative to certain discrimination in public workplaces and education. And Senator French will be happy to know that I'm going to be relatively brief. You had 5 hours on this before, did you not?
We did.
You know, we did participate in the extraordinary hearing on Senator Khan's repeal and replace bill. And so this bill is an opportunity now to revisit and simply to repeal. So the deficiencies of the language passed do not create a burden on our schools and damage the curriculum and damage open and free discussion that ensures an educated citizenship and a strong, inclusive democracy. I gave you my previous testimony on what the problem of that language was, the way in which the word inherent, historically, and then now with the Attorney General's position, that inherent means settled habit. When I described the history of that settled habit on issues of race and rights, promulgated through, as we heard from Jefferson, but legislation, social practice, court rulings, and really a whole culture built for 2 centuries on settled habits. There was really no answer here to that position or disagreement with that position of the difficulties that settled habit created. And one might ask, why has there been a struggle in America for rights for women, for so-called racial minorities, and for children if there wasn't settled habit that had to be changed? Yet that now is what put teachers at risk today. And developing even since that testimony 2 weeks ago, I've had even more conversations with teachers, SAU administrators, principals, about the developing recruitment crisis in the state of New Hampshire for public school teachers, and also have heard now about an exodus from schools. This morning there was a report that up to 55% of teachers now in New Hampshire public schools are considering retiring early or leaving the profession in New Hampshire. Now surely COVID is involved in some of this, fatigue, and no wonder there. But also it is quite clear from what people are telling me in the schools that this language is having an extraordinary chilling effect, particularly on recruitment, as teachers wonder why they should come here when what they say in a classroom teaching what they've usually taught might subject them to lawsuits or dismissal. And I will note as well that at this moment in the state of New Hampshire, there is no single African-American public school teacher of social studies in this state. And I wonder how one could really recruit people to the state under this existing statute. And I will just add that I think perhaps it is ironic that today is the first day of Black History Month, and yet we have cast a statute that casts a pall over our schools. One of the happiest moments, the happiest kinds of moments I recall from my 39 years teaching at University of New Hampshire was when a student would come in, an advisor or just student in my classes, and say, Professor Waters, I've decided I really think I want to be a teacher. Can you tell me about the teaching program here? And I would say, I'm so glad, it's a wonderful career. It's a wonderful public service. You can change and transform the lives of young people at whatever level that you teach. And I also say there's opportunity in this state. I hope you will stay in New Hampshire. I say I would add old folks like me are about to retire, you know. But particularly, I could really say that this is a good place to work. We have good schools, good support for teachers. I'm not sure I could make that argument anymore. And I truly think that that's a tragedy for the future of the education of our children in the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Does anyone have any questions for Senator Waters?
Thank
Seeing
you.
none, thank you. Jonathan Spiro. Welcome.
Afternoon. My name is Jonathan Spiro Savet. I live in Nashua, where I also work as a rabbi. I have been a high school teacher of American history and literature, and I currently serve on our state's Commission for Holocaust and Genocide Education, honored to serve with Senator Khan. And I come to speak to you in strong support of this bill. I have chosen to be a local civic leader in this country that saved the life of my family and my wife's family from the tyranny of the Tsar and the genocide of Hitler. My group's history obligates me to be a builder of this country, and I am implicated as a member of both a religious minority and the white majority. Earlier in my career, out of those senses of obligation, I created a high school course with a colleague at a private Jewish school in place of the usual AP US History and Literature curriculum. We gave our students interdisciplinary tools to look at American history and culture and at themselves as critical citizens, connected critics, to use the terminology of the philosopher Michael Walzer. Perhaps our Jewish reality as a group who have so often lived the American dream and so often also been targets of violence and discrimination, even here, made that perspective an obvious starting point. But what we did in a private school was to prototype a concept applicable far more widely. I am proud that my alums have become those connected and critical citizens. They've gone on to work for our national defense and intelligence, and in our legal system before the Supreme Court, advocating for the underrepresented. Teaching for critical citizenship is necessary to fuel a more engaged and intense patriotism for our country, a resilience to keep at our problems in times of crisis like now. How will we motivate our citizens to locate, our students to locate themselves as creators of a more perfect union? How is it possible to draw lessons about the dynamics between one's own ideals and group pressure if you don't learn about the 3/5 compromise and sit in shame and embarrassment as well as understanding of political strategy? How is it possible to probe Thomas Jefferson in both his idealism and his cowardice? Why bother reading Thoreau if we don't allow students to take seriously his indictments of this nation and even of his closest friends? How can we study Twain without asking whether he was mocking and lampooning the racism of his time or whether he was swept up in it? Sometimes a teacher might even have to go out on a limb and give voice to a difficult perspective, one hard for a patriot like me to entertain or say out loud, to get it on the table in the safety of our classrooms so it can be addressed and discussed. If the creators of divisive concept laws, such as the existing one, are concerned about this country lapsing into socialism, well, it is the hallmark of socialist dictatorships to write laws that hide their implications behind innocent-sounding words, to sow doubt among people about whether they or someone else is breaking the law, to create a situation where someone can take legal action against you or just threaten to do so. I have had conversations with people running for my school board, which meets just down the street from where I live, at my school in Nashua, my kids' school. There's never any actual incident of a teacher declaring someone is inherently racist, or that America is. There's only, I have heard of a few times, or I can't tell you the name of an actual school, and then I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't happen here. That is the current law, right out of the socialist playbook. If you are serious about education for a proud and patriotic American citizenship, and I hope you are, then be serious about it. Get engaged with the fine work of our social studies leaders and our civic education thinkers in this state, and pump standards, more of them, into our system, and invest in the resources and training for our educators around critical citizenship and a true patriotism. And in the meantime, get the existing words out of our law by passing SB 298. Thank you for your service and your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Does anyone have any questions? No, I'm gonna let it go.
Anytime.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, Holly Stevens. Nope, okay. Giles, are you here, Bissonnette? There you are, I'm sorry, you're right front and center. I'm gonna get more sleep tonight.
I said we're going to rest on our.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, they checked you off speaking. Senator Khan, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for the record, I'm Jay Kahn, State Senator in Cheshire County, representing 15 of 23 towns in Cheshire County. And Mr. Chairman, I'm returning to this topic again before the committee because I just think it is that important to review some of the testimony that was brought before the committee for Senate Bill 304. The distinction here is that this bill, Senate Bill 298, is specific to a repeal, not a replacement. So I think it gives us as a body the opportunity to do what was said during the debate about divisive concepts. And that's, can we separate this debate from a budget bill? And yes, we can. And we can have that debate and determine, is this really right for the state of New Hampshire? And I hope as we move through our decision-making process, we can see this, as it's currently written, is not in the best interests of our state. We heard testimony during Senate Bill 304 about how this was creating a chilling environment on government training and in school teaching and inhibiting critical thinking from occurring in our schools. Is teaching or training about our differences so divisive that we need laws to say that we need to treat everyone without regard to their differences? And do the anti-discrimination statutes make us a more inclusive body? Are we increasing our understanding of people who are different from us? And the anti-discrimination statutes that are in our state statutes in chapters 354 and 193, they're ambiguous and confusing as if by design. Consider the triple negative that there is in these statutes. In 354A31, it states, no public employer or government program shall teach that any person cannot attempt to treat others equally and without regard to differences. There's too many negatives there to understand what it is you can and can't do in teaching about differences. Does it mean that we should teach without regard to age, sex, gender identity, sexual identity, race, color, marital status, mental or physical disability? And just to hit one of the most obvious is sexual harassment training, a divisive concept. People are treated differently all the time on the basis of their race, sex, gender identity, religious affiliation, the list goes on. If you're under 18, you can't vote. You can't attend certain movies. If you're under 25, you can't rent a car without it becoming exponentially more difficult. If you're a woman in America, you're likely to be earning 84% of what your male counterparts who are working just as many hours are going to be earning, and that's called a gender-based pay gap. There's lots of research on that. And if you're transgender, you are 4 times more likely to be the victim of sexual and other kinds of violent crime than you are if you are a cisgendered person. These are just facts and statistics. But do we stop talking about those and what their implications are? Because perhaps it might suggest that there's a system that advantages some and disadvantages others. How do we address these very real issues without having the necessary conversations about why these discrepancies even exist? In schools, students with disabilities account for 15% of all public school students. And we treat students with disabilities differently in our schools through what's called an individual education plan. It accounts for about 30,000 of our state's high school students have individual education plans. It's a way to ensure that students receive an adequate education in the way that's best catered to their needs. Do we stop teaching statistical methods because those can be used to show how income and educational outcomes and lifespan correlate to race? Do we stop demonstrating that race influences education level, lifespan, and access to financial assets? All of those have been demonstrated in trainings that our Federal Reserve Bank has put out to the public in the last year in a series called Racism and the Economy. Consider 354A33. No employee shall be subject to any adverse employment action, warning, or discipline of any kind for refusing to participate in any training that compels participants to express belief in divisive concepts. If I view sexual harassment training as a divisive concept, can I refuse to participate? Can I refuse to participate in workplace training on safety? Can I teach about work style differences between different generational groups, boomers, Gen X, Y, Z, different age groups? Consider 19340, the prohibition on teaching discrimination. That's the title. This section states, nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit discussing the historical existence of ideas identified in this section. How does an educator interpret their ability to discuss current events? Topics like prejudice leading to murder of black men, or violence against Asians, or religious persecution of Muslims and Uyghurs. How about the death rates from COVID-19, or consensual sex, or sexual exploitation of teens, or body shaming? Is talking about these topics prohibited because they involve discussing unequal treatment? And we heard this from teachers, outstanding teachers, best teachers in our state. And they're wondering, they're asking this question. Are we to teach to a world that doesn't exist, where everyone is treated equally, or to the world that does exist, with all of its imperfections? Which of these approaches is going to prepare me or my grandchildren for a world in which I encounter people that are different from me? Where do I see myself in the experiences of others? Reading the testimony of people supporting the current statutes, and we had 2,000 people expressing that, it seems that the people who support the current statutes say it's because they don't want critical race theory taught in schools. And if that's what this is all about, then we didn't need to cloak that fear in a statute that involves all other protected classes. And why don't we take that issue on head on? There's very little evidence. There was one letter in which anyone identified a public school teaching critical race theory. And if there were objections to that, why not share that with school administrators or the school board? That's where the authority really ought to exist. It's always existed there. And you know what? I followed up on that incident, and in that one incident that was pointed out during that testimony on Senate Bill 304, whether that was in person or written, that's exactly what happened. Somebody reported it to the school, it went to the school board, the contract was terminated, and that was the end. That contractor was no longer providing that training in that school district. The point is, we don't need an ambiguous law that threatens teachers and public employees and drags New Hampshire through the press as a hyper-fearful state where bounties are placed on successful complaints against teachers, leading to their dismissal. And as Senator Waters was just saying, that won't fix our teacher shortage problems, nor any of our workforce shortages in this state. This is an example, and I used this before, I think it's so appropriate. This is an example of hitting a nail with a sledgehammer because there are a lot of unintended consequences when you do it. There's a lot of ground to be gained by repealing this anti-discrimination, divisive concepts, prohibition statutes, and starting over with a dialogue about critical race theory, ways to address issues of bias, and how to become a more inclusive and accepting state of differences that do exist. This is the point behind the repeal legislation. And I hope that this body, that we give this serious thought and we come together and recognize that we can be more open and more direct in what we're trying to achieve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to take any questions.
Answer me first. So just a quick question, because you may know, has any teacher been disciplined for violating the freedom from discrimination statute? Has it been brought up? Has someone been accused of it anywhere?
I am aware.
Okay.
I asked the Human Rights Commission, which is where the first investigative step would take place. There had been complaints. They had not been followed up on because they were too indirect.
One other question, just sort of pertinent, because you left an open-ended question like at what point can we not teach books and things? Earlier we had Mr. Spear was talking about different books. I used to like, I haven't read them in a long time, James Joyce. And Araby's his best little writing, if you ever want to read one. But what I particularly liked when I was young, they had, it was more satirical. It was he wrote a story about cooking Irish babies. It was during the famine, they were exporting food. So I think you would be allowed to teach that book in that writing, but you wouldn't be able to advocate for a premise. You were asking a rhetorical question to me, so I was just answering it. I think it's advocacy is the point where you need to stop. You can talk. When the Manchester man who represents the BLM movement talked to me, you were here, I believe, and he talked about the different ladders. There's you know what I'm talking about, the step ladders. And I'm not a big believer in equity because I think it doesn't include everyone. You and I have had this discussion. It's certainly for getting accepted to a higher institution at Harvard or med school or law school, there's only a zero amount of, there's so many openings. And if you give one side more of an opportunity than the other, I have a problem with it. So if in public schools, they do talk a lot about equity. It's taught in my Timberlane schools. And if you have a diverse view from that, you are pretty ostracized out because you don't even want to say like saying, I want everyone treated equally because I think some other people are going to get put ahead of others. You're not going to get the best and brightest. I think in our schools right now, there's a lot of fear, which would be my side, of saying, geez, I don't exactly agree with that. And you're very shunned in the public school community if you have these views. So again, if the teacher goes beyond, they can talk about anything that happened historically. I know about Jefferson, I know his faults, I know his pluses, and I think you're allowed to teach them. It's advocacy of a position is what this bill was trying to stop, last year's bill, not the current bill.
So there are a few points I think you're making in there.
Sure. Lots of points.
I think the big issue that we heard is that while there may be historic context for identifying discrimination that's occurred, there is no definition and no guidance about current experience, current literature, current experience of students. And this is where the third rail seems to exist, the hot button. Can teachers engage students in things that are occurring today that might relate to your example of Irish babies? And students may want to talk about that and feel constrained by this statute in their classrooms. And that's the breakdown that we heard from students about their critical thinking skills. They go on to college, they confront issues, and no longer are they just learning history, they are to describe how history is replicated in today's world. That's the exercise that is the critical thinking part, right? How do you apply history to current events and new knowledge? That's what was inhibiting our students and inhibiting the teachers in their classroom from having those discussions. So, and relative to, you know, if there's this discussion about affirmative action or things that deal with trying to rectify certain shortages, I think what Mr. McKim was saying to us is there are bigger goals than just looking at affirmative action on a single case basis. He was saying that in certain communities where there are no doctors of color, you could say the same things of women in architecture or engineering or the point is it's important to have a diversity in the workplace, right? And in the medical profession. Because we know the disparities that exist in healthcare by race, and perhaps by having people who are more educated and delivering healthcare who are more diverse and resemble people of other of a community, that is a goal that is more than just an admission of a single student. It's how you create an infrastructure to support our society. So to resemble our society.
Thank you.
Those.
Go ahead, Senator Willie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my questions. So in my reading of the statute as it exists, despite Senator Gannon's characterization that it says you can teach history, but you can't advocate, the way that I read the statute, it says the statute says clearly certain topics shall not be taught. Not about advocacy. It says clearly shall not be taught. So how do we distinguish what shall be taught and what shall not be taught? For example, you raise the issue of the gender pay gap, which is based in science and perhaps a teacher's own personal experience. Is that teacher allowed to discuss that, to put forth that? And furthermore, is a teacher allowed to not necessarily advocate for a particular position, but for the purposes of debate, put forth a topic of conversation? Is that advocacy or is it not advocacy? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we heard from the student who was on the debate team who had a conversation shut down during the debate because he was taking a position. Well, that's what debate is all about, right? Is that you take a position, whether it's the one that you believe or the one that you have to advocate for as a part of the academic experience. You know, I think of the science teacher who might say that we don't have enough women in science and math. That's a historical fact. What are the barriers? And what if the students, you know, I mean, this is a provocative topic to raise in a science class, but how do you motivate students to go forward and be different? Be the exception and pursue careers in engineering. It's a very legitimate conversation to have in a classroom. Did the teacher advocate that, you know, a divisive concept at the point that she initiated or he initiated that conversation in the classroom? It's certainly a fact. I think we're going to trip over this again and again. And when it becomes uncomfortable for somebody in the classroom, it's going to be something that the teacher it could lose their career, could lose their job, or at least be embarrassed by the accusation that they created an atmosphere in which a divisive concept was introduced. This does say it's a statute that prohibits the teaching of discrimination, and that just is that really who we are?
Follow-up?
Yes, go ahead.
So Senator Gannon also spoke about, maybe in certain, schools, a position might be unpopular, right? So in your opinion, even if a particular position is unpopular and subjects that student to perhaps some inquiry, is that a basis to actually ban that topic because someone feels uncomfortable by being challenged? And my other question is, if we are banning topics of conversation, and this is just one topic that we're banning, what I'm concerned is, what are we going to ban next? What topic of conversation this session or next session or the following session is going to be banned?
Yeah, I think you raised a great question, Senator, and I think this is a matter for local school boards to determine. That's where you have this kind of debate, because you've got a real instance and a board that is delegated this responsibility. We didn't need to create state statutes and another kind of adjudicative process to hold an axe over teachers for something that really isn't happening. I don't know a teacher who wouldn't, in their discussions of hot button issues, current events, wouldn't create the atmosphere that this is a safe space. And you're not to accuse or judge somebody else's. You could take another position. You can defend another position. But you have to allow for other positions to be introduced and discussed in this classroom. That's what teaching methods are all about.
Thank you, Senator Khan. Do you have a question? We're all set. Thank you, Senator Khan, for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And that seems, does anyone else wish to speak on SB 298? Seeing none, this committee is adjourned. Can you send that down? Thank you.
Then you blew it.
Oh, I thought I sent you the list. I thought I had a list of speakers. I don't know, I kept.